I want to introduce Al Capone briefly here, because his story begins in Prohibition, and because he is the figure who, more than any other, defined what America thought organized crime was during this period. I will have a full episode about Capone later. Here, the facts you need to understand the scale of what Prohibition produced. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Italian immigrants, father a barber, mother a seamstress. Grew up in a neighborhood that was not exceptional for poverty or crime, not a slum, not particularly rough. Attended school until 6th grade, dropped out after an incident with a teacher. Joined the 5 Points gang at approximately 16. Came to the attention of Johnny Torrio, who was building criminal operations in Chicago around 1919. Moved to Chicago. By 1925, Capone was running the Chicago outfit. His annual income in 1927 estimated at $105 million. $105 million in 1927. This is approximately $1.8 billion in current purchasing power. From a Brooklyn barber's son, in 7 years. This is the specific economic miracle that Prohibition produced. Not for American business, not for American workers, not for the American family that the temperance movement wanted to protect. For the men who understood what the law had accidentally created. The largest unregulated market in American history, with no competition from legal producers and no legal mechanisms for enforcement of market rules. I want to talk about the emotional reality of Prohibition, because the facts and the statistics are not the whole story. The country did not feel that Prohibition was wrong. Not most of the country. Not in the 1920s. There was a genuine, widespread, sincere support for the temperance cause. The churches that had organized behind Prohibition were not fringe institutions. They represented tens of millions of Americans who genuinely believed that alcohol was a moral evil and that its removal from American life would improve American life. When you read the letters to newspapers from ordinary Americans in the early 1920s, you find genuine enthusiasm for Prohibition, genuine belief that it was working, genuine anger at the bootleggers and the speakeasies and the corruption. The contradiction, that people supported Prohibition while simultaneously patronizing speakeasies, was real and was felt. And it produced a specific psychological response that historians have called compartmentalization. The person who went to church on Sunday and supported Prohibition, who believed genuinely that alcohol was destructive and that its prohibition was right, was also, sometimes, the person who went to the speakeasy on Saturday and ordered a drink. The contradiction was managed not by changing the belief, but by separating the behavior from the belief. The speakeasy was just this once. The drink was medicinal. The back room of the candy shop was not really what it looks like. This compartmentalization, the ability to hold contradictory beliefs and behaviors simultaneously without discomfort, is not unique to Prohibition. It is a specific human capacity that organized crime, across the entire period of this series, relied on and exploited. I relied on it myself. When I was 11 years old in the speakeasy with Clara, I did not think, "This is wrong." I thought, "This is exciting." I have been thinking about that 8-year-old and that 11-year-old and what they understood and what they refused to understand for 13 years. I want to say something about the specific relationship between immigrant communities and Prohibition, because it is central to understanding who organized crime was and where it came from. The 18th Amendment was not passed in a cultural vacuum. The temperance movement was, in significant part, a movement of native-born, Protestant rural Americans directed at immigrant, Catholic, urban Americans. The saloon that the temperance movement wanted to close was not the saloon in the small Midwestern town. It was the saloon in the immigrant neighborhood of the industrial city, the saloon that was the social center of the Italian community, the Jewish community, the Irish community, the Polish community. For immigrant communities, alcohol, wine at the family table, beer at the local saloon, the specific drinks that were part of the cultural traditions brought from Europe, was not a moral failing. It was a cultural practice, continuous with centuries of tradition, embedded in religion and celebration and daily life. The 18th Amendment told these communities, "Your culture is wrong. Your practices are illegal. The things you do at home and in your neighborhoods are criminal." The response of a significant portion of immigrant communities, particularly Italian and Jewish communities, refusal. Not violent refusal, initially. The refusal of people who did not believe the law was legitimate, who did not believe they had consented to it through any genuine democratic process, who continued to make wine at home and brew beer in basements and buy from bootleggers who were, often, from their own communities and whom they knew and trusted. The specific irony? The criminal organizations that supplied bootleg alcohol to these communities were staffed largely by members of those communities. The bootlegger who supplied the Italian neighborhood was often Italian. The bootlegger who supplied the Jewish neighborhood was often Jewish. Not because Italians and Jews were criminally inclined by nature, a racist claim that was made often during this period, and that is false. Because the immigrant community's refusal to accept prohibition as legitimate created a market, and the people best positioned to supply that market were those embedded in the community, known and trusted by the customers, sharing the cultural understanding that what they were doing was not wrong. The criminal organizations that came to dominate organized crime in America were built, in significant part, on this community foundation. The supply of illegal alcohol in New York and other major cities was not managed by a single organization. In the early years of Prohibition, it was managed by dozens of competing gangs, operating by territory, each controlling specific neighborhoods or specific product types or specific distribution channels. Competition between these gangs followed the logic I described earlier. In a legal market, competition is managed through price, quality, and customer service. In an illegal market, competition is managed through negotiation, threat, and violence. The Beer Wars, the series of violent conflicts between bootlegging organizations in New York and Chicago in the 1920s, were economically market competition. They were also murders. The specific numbers are difficult to establish because many deaths were unreported, ruled as accidents, or otherwise absorbed into the general statistics of urban violence. What we know. In Chicago, between 1920 and 1930, approximately 400 murders were attributed to gang warfare over bootlegging territories. The conviction rate for these murders? Approximately 2%. In New York, the numbers are harder to establish. New York had a more fragmented gang structure than Chicago, and the violence was more diffuse. What the statistics reveal is not only the number of deaths, but the conviction rate. 2%. The legal system, the courts, the prosecutors, the juries, was not effectively addressing the violence, in some cases, because witnesses were intimidated or killed. In some cases, because the murders were committed without witnesses by professional killers. In some cases, because the prosecutors and judges were compromised. In many cases, some combination of all three. I want to say something personal here that I have not said before. My father. He died in 1949. He was 63 years old. We were not estranged. We had a good relationship, warm, the specific warmth of a father and daughter who respected each other. We had dinner together regularly through the 1940s. We never talked about Prohibition. Specifically, we never talked about what I slowly understood, through the 1930s and 1940s about the nature of his sales work, the contacts he had, the restaurants he took me to where the owner knew him very well and where the bill was sometimes not presented. I have thought about this for 11 years since he died. I think he knew things he did not tell me. I think I knew he knew things, and I did not ask. Not because I was incurious. I am, by nature, curious about most things, because I was afraid of what the answers might be. This is the compartmentalization I described. The belief that if you don't ask, you don't need to know. The belief that not knowing protects you from something. What it actually protects you from? Discomfort. Not from the facts. The facts are the facts, regardless of whether you know them. I did not ask my father. I have been asking the questions since. December 5th, 1933. The 21st Amendment was ratified. Prohibition ended. The legal saloons reopened. The breweries resumed production. The distilleries came back online. What was supposed to happen? The criminal organizations that had built their power on bootlegging would lose their business and disperse. What actually happened? Something very different. The organizations did not disperse. They were too well established to disperse. They had, over 13 years, built the following: networks of corruption in police departments, in courts, in city governments, corruption that did not disappear when the specific illegal product changed. Capital, money made from bootlegging, reinvested in legitimate and quasi-legitimate businesses, laundries, restaurants, real estate, trucking companies. Skills in violence, in negotiation, in the management of illegal markets, in the specific organizational techniques of running a large criminal enterprise. The organizations simply moved their product from alcohol, now legal, profit margins collapsed, to gambling, the numbers game, the casino, the bookmaking operation. Illegal gambling was, in 1934, what illegal alcohol had been in 1924, a product that a significant portion of the population wanted, that the law prohibited, that could be supplied at substantial profit by organizations willing to manage the risks. Labor racketeering, the control of unions, the specific power of being able to threaten a work stoppage, or to prevent one, in exchange for payment from employers, or from workers, or from both simultaneously. Loan sharking, high-interest loans to people who could not access conventional credit, the specific power of debt in a community without alternatives. Prostitution, narcotics, protection rackets. The menu changed. The organization remained. I am going to speak from 1960 now, looking back at the full arc of what I have been describing. Prohibition lasted 13 years, 1920 to 1933. It produced the organizational template of American organized crime. The specific structure, the territorial division, the commission of bosses, the corruption of public officials, the use of legitimate businesses as fronts that would define organized crime for the next 4 decades was built during Prohibition. The capital base that funded expansion into legitimate businesses, the money made from bootlegging funded the penetration of organized crime into legal industries, real estate, trucking, entertainment, restaurants, waste disposal. The corruption networks that persisted long after the specific corruption of Prohibition enforcement ended. The relationships between police departments and criminal organizations, between political machines and criminal financing, between judges and criminal influence. These were built during Prohibition, and they did not end when Prohibition ended. The public's relationship to organized crime, which was and continues to be a complicated mixture of fear, fascination, moral condemnation, and practical accommodation. The public that patronized the Speakeasy while supporting Prohibition had already established the psychological template that would allow it to watch the Kefauver hearings on television in 1950, be genuinely shocked, and then mostly go back to what it was doing. Prohibition lasted 13 years. Its consequences lasted at least 40, arguably more. I was 4 years old when Prohibition started. I am 44 years old now. I have lived my entire adult life in a city that was shaped in its politics, its real estate, its entertainment industry, its police department, its courts, by what Prohibition built. What do I feel about this? Anger, partly. At the specific naivete of the reformers who thought you could eliminate a market by making it illegal. At the corruption that was so systematic and so long-lasting. At the men who killed each other over market share and whose deaths produced approximately no legal consequences. Guilt, partly. The compartmentalization that I described, the not asking, the not knowing, the back room of the candy shop that I accepted as supplies for years after I was old enough to know better. And something more complicated. The city I grew up in. The city I described in 1947 as extraordinary, as vibrant, as the most interesting place on earth, was extraordinary, was vibrant, was genuinely the most interesting place I have ever been. It was also built and managed and financed, in significant part, by people who were willing to threaten and bribe and kill to protect their financial interests. Both things were true. Both were the city. Both were New York. I have been trying for 13 years to hold both things at the same time. To not romanticize the jazz clubs by forgetting who owned them. To not condemn the city by forgetting what made it extraordinary. This is the series about that trying. Come back for the next episode. Al Capone, the Brooklyn boy. The boy who made $105 million a year. The man who was convicted of income tax evasion. The country that preferred to prosecute the tax evasion rather than face what it knew about everything else. Come back.